minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I ask that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the 80th anniversary of D-Day, where more than 2,500 Americans gave their lives on the beaches of Normandy for our freedom. On that night of June 6, 1944, President Roosevelt went on national radio to address the country for the first time about the Normandy invasion. His speech took the form of a prayer that I would like to read. My fellow Americans, last night when I spoke with you about the fall of Rome, I knew at that moment that the troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the channel in another and greater operation. It has come to pass with success thus far. And so, in this poignant hour, I ask that you join me in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, the pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give them strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, and steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard, for the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again, and we know that by thy grace and by thy righteousness, our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tired, by night and by day, without rest until the victory is won. The darkness will rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. For these men are lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest. They fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They fight to let justice arise and tolerance and goodwill among thy people. They yearn but for an end of battle, for their return to their haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. And for us at home, fathers, mothers, children's wives, sisters and brothers of these brave men overseas, whose thoughts and prayers are ever with them, help us, Almighty God, to rededicate ourselves into renewed faith in thee this hour of great sacrifice. Many people have urged that I call the nation into a single day of special prayer, but because the road is long and the desire is great, I ask that our people devote themselves to a continuance of prayer as we rise each new day, and again, when each night is spent, let words of prayer be on our lips, invoking thy help to our efforts. Give us strength too, strength in our daily tasks, to redouble our contributions we make in the physical and material support of our armed forces. And let our hearts be stout, to wait out the long travail, to bear the sorrows that may come, to impart our courage unto our sons, wheresoever they may be. And, O Lord, give us faith. Give us faith in thee, faith in our sons, faith in each other, faith in our united crusade. Let not the keenness of our spirit ever be dulled. Let not the impact of temporary events or temporal matters of but fleeting moment, let not these deter us in our unconquerable purpose. With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy. Help us to conquer the apostles of greed and the racial arrogancies. Lead us to the saving of our country and with our sister nations into a world of unity that will spell a sure peace, a peace invulnerable to all the schemings of unworthy men, and a peace that will let all men live in freedom, reaping the just rewards of their honest toil. Thy will be done, Almighty God. Amen. Several of my colleagues are here joining me tonight to read letters from American soldiers describing the events of D-Day. First, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Florida, Congressman Stubbe.
Thank you for yielding. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the Great Crusade, toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. he will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazis' triumph of 40 and 41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. General Dwight Eisenhower.
Now I recognize my good friend, Representative Adderholt from Alabama, for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, in honor of the upcoming 80th anniversary of D-Day, I rise to share the words of mechanic mate, first class, Paul Hudson Atkins of Sheffield, Alabama, in Alabama's 4th Congressional District. He was one of the first wave of soldiers that had landed on Omaha Beach. On June the 6th, 1944, Mr. Atkins wrote the following letter from Omaha Beach, and I quote, "The first batch of parachute boys are hit behind enemy lines somewhere between 0630 and 0930. Heavy gunfire going out on the horizon, mostly planes overhead headed for France. General granted at 0500, destroyer ahead shot up 3 mines. Ships everywhere to the right and to the left and as far as can be seen. Must be in the thousands of small boats out in the water. The water was exceptionally rough for small boats. We headed for the beach, 4 small boats out of 900. On LST, landing ship tank 511, pick up wounded. Battleships and destroyers flying over our heads. I could see floating bodies on the water, some of the bodies dismembered, floating in life jackets. Small crafts sunk along the beaches, all sorts of obstacles in the water, out to about 500 yards. Only 4 of our small boats were dispatched to the beach, another one sent to Omaha Beach to assist. Madam Speaker, this letter that I just read serves as a powerful reminder of the harrowing scenes Allied forces were faced with and the bravery they exemplified on D-Day. I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Moore of Alabama, for organizing this remembrance for those who fought so valiantly for our freedoms and for giving us the opportunity to continue to tell the stories of these great Americans. May God bless each of those soldiers, their families, and may God bless America, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. At this time, I'll recognize Mr. Westerman from Arizona.
I want to thank the gentleman from Alabama for organizing this tonight, Mr. Moore, and as we reflect on 80 years since the invasion of D-Day, it's my honor to get to read an account from Robert Harlan Hoare of Illinois. And what I'm about to share, it says the following is my transcription of the D-Day related section of my father's, Flight Officer Robert Harlan Hoare's pilot's log. I am Karen Sue Hoare Burton, his only child. Invasion started. Over 80 holes in my glider. Germans were shooting many toes. Best pal Buck Jackson was just killed after releasing over enemy territory. Knocked down 3 times in landing, made it okay. Could feel heat from those bullets. Mighty lucky to come out alive. Gave my pal a morphine shot to ease the pain. Stayed by him in the open field for an hour. Made him as comfortable as possible until I could get medical aid. German mortars and machine guns were taking pot shots at us. I was surprised at my own coolness. I had Tommy gun ready for action. Moved up with the 82nd Division, expecting counterattack. Dug in, plenty nervous. Waited all night, but nothing happened. Got one sniper. There were snipers all over the place. I learned more in 5 minutes than the Army taught me in 2 years. Recommended for DFC. They can have their medals as far as I'm concerned. Thought of my wife all the time. Had her picture with me. Could hear those angels flapping their wings many times. Kept my pocket Bible with me all the time. God was with me out there, and I'm thankful for it. Was it hell? I know, because I went through the worst part of it. Thought of Mom and Dad many times. Often thought that Dad could really have a picnic killing Huns over here, just like hunting chucks. You have to wait for them and then pick them off. I didn't take any souvenirs. What's the use? I'm no glory grabber. Just end this war and let me come home. Many times I prayed out there, and I meant every word I said. Things were plenty tough, and I needed all the strength I could get. Buck finally died. If I get decorated, his mother is going to have that medal. Got to move up now, so that's all for now. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Westman. I now recognize my friend from Texas, Mr. Weber.
I thank the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, for the special order commemorating the valor of the greatest generation. 8 decades ago, brave men stormed Normandy's beaches to confront tyranny to secure our freedoms. On this 80th D-Day anniversary, we honor their courage and resilience. Their sacrifice reminds us of humanity's resilience in adversity. I'll share a couple of quotes from a sergeant and lieutenant. Highlighting the battleship Texas, he said, highlighting the battleship Texas power, which is now proudly stationed, by the way, Ms. Speaker, in Texas 14, and highlighting the bravery of its soldiers too. He, quote, as the sky lightened, the Armada became visible. The smoking and burning French shoreline also became more defined. At 0600, the huge guns of the Allied navies opened up with what must have been one of the greatest military artillery barrages ever. The diesels on board our craft failed to muffle the tornadic blasting. I could see the battleship Texas firing broadside into the coastline. Boom, ba-ba, boom, ba-ba, boom. Within minutes, great giant swells from the recoil of these guns nearly swamped us and added to the seasickness and misery. But one could also see the 2,000-pound missiles tumbling on their targets, I end quote. And then one from Sergeant Robert Bixler, 116th Infantry Regiment, the 29th Infantry Division. And thank you, Sergeant Bixler, author of Our Brave Patriots. He said this, quote, the ramp was lowered immediately after the rockets fired. It was our hope and desire to run right up on the beach for a dry landing, not because we were afraid of getting wet, but because if we were soaked, it would be added weight to carry while climbing. The British Navy men had promised to put us down dry, but suddenly we ran aground with the ramp dropped. The officer said, everybody out! Looking ahead, I could see 15 or 20 feet of water, a muddy, dirty, gray stretch. The entire area was marked by craters, shell holes from the guns of Texas and the bombers. And then I quote from Lieutenant George Kirshner. Thank you, Lieutenant Kirshner. 2nd Ranger Battalion, that was his quote. And I want to tell you, Ms. Speaker, that we should never forget the bravery of the greatest generation. And let us always uphold the principles for which they fought so valiantly. Most importantly, let us ensure that we teach our children, the latest generation, about the greatest generation. and about their remarkable legacy. They came home from World War II. They destroyed the vilest enemy the world had ever seen and kept the world safe. And they simply came home and built the greatest country the world had ever known. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. I recognize Representative Babin from Texas, another friend of mine.
I thank the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, for this special order. And what a special time it is. As the son of a World War II vet myself who was in the Pacific, and as a former Army enlisted troop and former Army Air Force officer myself, stationed in Germany during the 70s, it's a great honor that I have the opportunity to read a letter written by World War II and D-Day veteran U.S. Army Major Ellsworth Hill, written to his family back home on June the 14th, 1944. As it goes, dear Florence, Barbara, and Nancy, this one letter to all three will have to suffice for the time being, for there is scarcely an idle moment to write. And when there is an idle moment, I usually am so tired that I just fall asleep. Today, however, I've had some time to myself and have been far enough away from activities to really enjoy myself. As you may surmise, I am somewhere in France. Just where is, of course, not to be disclosed, but as the papers have carried the story of D-Day, you know that it was on the coast of Normandy. The going for the past week has been quite rugged, particularly for an old man like myself. But I have found that I could keep up with the youngsters. You should have received a letter from me dated June the 5th, but nothing has been written in the meantime. All the things incident to the landing on the beaches and the first few days here can be left for future communication. What can be said now would hardly do justice to what happened. Maybe as things develop, I can write you of my own experiences. It so happened that I went over with the first detachment of the advanced section. Because of that, I have had a bird's eye view, or should I say a foxhole view, of this show. The magnitude of it is beyond all comprehension. For the past week, I've been living in a pup tent. That is, when we have had a chance to even pitch it. I sleep on the ground, and I mean sleep. Tottering around with a pack, sidearms, and K-rations through the country and up and down hills has been pretty strenuous exercise. By way of diversion, there's an occasional air raid or some artillery shelling of the roads that we are traveling on. Fortunately, the weather has been marvelous. Only one day of rain, and that wasn't too bad. When I stop to think of it, I find that I am feeling pretty marvelously well, and I am really in good physical condition. The spot where our camp is located right now is in a very picturesque country. I don't know whether Mummy has been in this part of Normandy, but if she has, she can tell you how pretty that these French farms are. Tonight I had the first cooked meal in over a week. I went up to a little French cafe in a small village and, believe it or not, had steak, French fried potatoes, strawberries, and a bottle of wine, all for 100 francs, about $2. I am enclosing a 5-franc note for Nancy's collection of whatnots. The people here are getting excited over what they say is their liberation. As one drives through the villages, they chase and wave, and every farmer wants to give you wine. But with it all, there has been destruction. Some of the most beautiful chateaus have just been devastated, and whole families have been made homeless. Because I can tell you so little about what is going on, and because I am sleepy, I will stop here. All I really wanted to say was that I am well and not to have any worries about me. With love to you all, and a word that I will write as often as circumstances permit, the Old Man Hill. What an eye-opening letter. Folks, no one but those who were there can only and truly understand what our D-Day and World War II veterans went through, what they saw, and what they felt. I agree with Major Hill. Without seeing it firsthand, it's nearly impossible to comprehend. However, what we can do is continue to honor the sacrifices and the memories of these World War II vets who went into Europe to fight for our freedoms and liberties. So to the D-Day and World War II veterans still with us today, we may never be able to repay your debt, but I pray that we never miss an opportunity to say thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Babin. I yield to my friend Garrett Grace from Louisiana.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman from Alabama for organizing. Madam Speaker, I'm going to read from the journal of Sidney Montz, who served as a lieutenant in Company D of 8th Regiment in the 4th Infantry Division of the United States Army. The 4th Division was one of the 5 divisions that struck Utah and Omaha beaches on June 6, 1944, D-Day. He was born in Louisiana in 1914 and served as an ROTC corporal at LSU, and he enlisted in the Army in August 1942 and became a lieutenant. Montz was 29 years old on D-Day, which was his first combat. He kept a diary from May 15th, 1944 until July 31st, 1944. The diary was donated by Montz's son to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, along with a trunk of personal belongings from his time in the European theater during World War II. Madam Speaker, before I start, I'm going to make note that the diary makes mention of the LCVP, which is the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, otherwise known as the Higgins Craft, tens of thousands of which were built in Louisiana and often credited as being a game changer for the D-Day landing. I quote, May 16th through June 1st, took things easy, drew equipment, time off, Torquay. Took a few short marches to keep in shape. A few days before June 1st, we were briefed, shown maps and sand table of where we were going. Everything in good shape. I was executive officer, but will take 81 millimeter. Wittenberger does not know mortar. Officers and company, Buckles, Woodruff, Wittenberger, Levy, Buckaloo, Olson, Executive Montz, CO Sampson. June 2nd, left camp at 10:20 for Torquay. Got on LCVP to go to ship, the SS Dickman. On ship life was okay. June 4th, too busy to go to church, making final preparation. Heard we sail today for landing tomorrow. Weather very bad, so timing's called off. Spent most of the night in lounge drinking coffee and listening to radio. Heard of the fall of Rome. In bed by 0200. June 5th, heard we sail at 1300. General Ike message led over the loudspeaker. After we sailed, told D-Day June 6th, H hour 0630. We anchor at 0200 June 6th and get into LCVP. Checked all equipment that was already in LCVP. Men in good shape and ready to go. Told that 10,500 planes would be in operation, 6,000 bombers. Did not know anything except we'd land on Utah Beach, red and green, with 12,000 paratroopers landing H4 inland. Messed around shooting bull and kidding each other, channel pretty rough. Men will be fed at 2,200, officers 2,400. June 6th, D-Day, 2,400, eating a good meal, maybe the last boat team. Sea very rough, started loading one, went down a compartment with my men about 0230, went over to the side, down net, it was really tough. Took off the rendezvous area, had a tough time finding it, made it okay. Started circling, finally other boats came in. Planes lit up the beaches, AA fires starting, flares dropping. Beautiful sight, but it scares the hell out of you. All hell broke loose from the beach, some boats hit by 88. We're near beach and 88 opened up on the boat on our right and almost hit us. Some boats hit landmines. Luckily we landed because much more we would have sunk. Water still rough. Jumped out in waist-deep water about 500 to 600 yards from seawall. The longest I've seen in my life. MG mortar and artillery fighter around us. Finally in shallow water and able to run. Had to miss all types of obstacles in and out of water. Picked up 6 rounds of 81 millimeter ammo on the way. It seemed as though we'd never reach the seawall. Men being blown up all around. me. You could hear them scream. It was horrible. Finally hit seawall, stopped to get a blow and bearing. General Roosevelt walking around telling everyone to clear the beach or they'd get killed. Rockets hit the third section, injured. Lieutenants Levy, Arps, Singer, Cole, Sergeants Hastings killed, Corporals Herb, Brandt, and Wajida. Time to move or they'll kill us. General Roosevelt gave me lots of courage. Under small arms and artillery fire. Navy left us 1,000 yards too far left, and the left outfit caught hell. Moved in very fast. Every house and tree loaded with men. They fire at you from all directions, very hard to see them as they use smokeless powder. We'll get on them soon. Then they will catch hell. Madam Speaker, I just urge all Americans to remember the incredible sacrifice of so many before us that allowed us to have this amazing nation. Again, I thank my friend from Alabama and yield back.
I yield to Representative Griffin from Virginia.
I thank my colleague for having this particular hour so that we can show our appreciation for D-Day and the veterans who were there. For all who are not going to Normandy on this particular D-Day, I would invite you to Bedford, Virginia, where the National D-Day Memorial is holding their ceremony this Thursday, June 6th at 11 a.m. Why, you might ask, would there be a memorial in Bedford, Virginia? And the answer is because of the Bedford boys of Company A, 116th Regiment, 29th Division. Per capita, Bedford lost more men on D-Day than any other community in the nation. As a result of this, a number of people got together in the 90s. Bob Slaughter from Roanoke, who was a part of Company A and was there on D-Day, was a major force in starting the push for this National D-Day Memorial in Bedford. Lucille Hoback Bogus lost 2 brothers that day. She contributed a lot of time, and her children are continuing the tradition of moving to make sure that people remember D-Day and the sacrifices of Bedford. Virginia Delegate Lacey Putney, the gentleman from Bedford, also was instrumental in making sure that the funds were available to get this project off the ground. And it was such a success that on June 6, 2001, at the opening of the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia, President George W. Bush participated and gave the keynote. Today I read a letter not from one of the soldiers, but from one of the wives of the Bedford boys. Ms. Ivy Lynn Skank of Bedford wrote this touching letter to her husband, John. It is a reminder of how life went for folks on the home front, where daily chores and family visits continued unabated, despite the epic global conflict that raged around husbands, sons, brothers, etc. overseas. Her letter. Darting, it's 11:30 Sunday night. This has been a day of continual activity. Breakfast, church, to get milk, butter, packed the car to go to Mother Skank's tomorrow, washed the dog, dusted the beans, etc. in the garden to keep the bugs from ruining them. We intended gathering a little pile of corn to take out to Mother S. When we got at it, realized there were too many ears just ready to use. So we gathered them, and now I'm waiting for the pressure to go down in the cooker so I can take out my few pints of lovely tender corn. I still have too many ears to take to Mother S. Mom and I just wondered what you'd say if you could see us canning at 11 o'clock at night on Sunday. She says if the corn doesn't keep, it will be because we canned it on a Sunday. I told her you were busy fighting on Sunday without even a chance to eat or rest. God grant that it'll not be long until you can be done with all that and come home to enjoy a few months of peace and calm. All my love is yours, Lynn. John Skank never received his wife's letter. Ivy Lynn wrote it on Sunday, July 16, 1944, intending to mail it the next day. But on that Monday, she received the telegram informing her that her husband had been killed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, June 6th. Bedford lost a total of 20 that day. 19 were from Company A. And what happened on July 16 is still remembered in Bedford. The telegrams were received at Green's drugstore. Elizabeth Tees came in to report she was the operator at 8:30 that morning. And the notices started coming in. Somebody from Bedford had died. They would receive 9 of those notices on that one day alone. And the notices kept coming in to Green's drugstore Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Today, we get used to having instant communications. But back then, the men who died on June 6th families didn't find out for more than a month that they had lost their loved ones. Today, Bedford Green's drugstore is the Bedford Boys Tribute Center. The people of Bedford will never forget. I was very glad to have known a number of these soldiers before they passed away, those who survived, and to have known Ms. Bogus when she was campaigning with the Virginia legislature to make sure the National D-Day Memorial became a reality. It's a wonderful, wonderful tribute. I encourage you all to visit. God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Griffith. This time I recognize my friend, Mr. Loudermilk from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my good friend from Alabama for the honor of participating in this moment. As many here have done, I have been to the beaches of Normandy and stood on Omaha Beach. On the 75th anniversary of the landing of D-Day, I was one of those selected to represent the United States there. And as I stood on the beach alone, thinking of the sand, and that sand I was standing on held the DNA of American patriots who fought that day to preserve liberty for all of us and to stop oppression and aggression. It was especially meaningful to me because my father was one of those that landed in Normandy on D-Day. He was a medic in the United States Army. No one fought alone that day. No single service fought alone. It took the Navy to deliver many of the soldiers to the shores of Omaha Beach, and my father was one of those that boarded an amphibious landing craft that took him to the beach. I would love to stand here today and read one of the letters that my father wrote to his sweetheart, who eventually became my mother. But his letters were lost in a flood many years ago in their home in Walhalla, South Carolina. But today I want to read the letter from Tracy Sugarman, who was a lieutenant in the Navy, was assigned to the amphibious squadron, and was one of those who, alongside his colleagues that served in the Army, landed on Omaha Beach. What's interesting about Mr. Sugarman is he was one of those that was considered an old man. He was 23 years old, and he was married. He had a young wife. And the letter that I'm going to read to you today is the letter that he sent to his wife. It reads, "My darling Junie, hope this gets out to you. It will be the last word from me for a long time. But don't worry, Angel. I'll get in touch with you the first chance I get. Believe me, darling, I'm feeling wonderfully well and absolutely squared away for anything that may come my way. For this wonderful peace of mind, I have to thank you, Junie. I'm intending to spend the rest of my life thanking you. Take care of yourself for me, sweetheart. Please call folks and tell them I'm fine, but can't write them. Hope to heavens this gets out. Bye for a little while, Angel. Remember, I love you with all my heart. Always keep that chin up and your head high, and keep that gleam always. Love you all." Fortunately, Tracy Sugarman was one of those that did return and was able to continue to live his life in freedom, thanks to the sacrifice of those that gave their last full measure of devotion on those sandy beaches in Normandy. God bless this country, and God bless the memories of all of those who served that day. I yield back.
Thank my friend from Georgia, and I recognize Representative Crenshaw.
Thank you, my friend from Alabama. This week marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, where tens of thousands of our finest, of our greatest generation, stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, part of the largest seaborne invasion in history, and ushered in an unprecedented era of human flourishing and prosperity because of their courage and sacrifice, because they understood that it was America's time to lead and to take up arms against tyranny and against the spread of aggression. And tonight I have the honor to read an account of that day from Private Benjamin Alvarado's personal diary. He was part of the second wave to land on the Easy Red portion of Omaha Beach in Normandy. These are his words. It was very early in the morning, 6th of June, 1944, cold, dark, and foggy with a little drizzle. The water was choppy. I could not see land even though we were only 11 miles from shore. The drone of the engines stopped and it was quiet again. It was 5:30 a.m. when all hell broke loose. All battleships began firing. Over 5,000 ships filled the waters and planes filled the sky as far as one could see, all headed in one direction. The noise was indescribably deafening. Continuous firing for our ships, coupled with the drone of our planes bombing the beaches. Never in all the training I went through was I prepared for this. It was time to go over, grab the rope net, lift my leg over the side, hang on for dear life, 60 pounds on my back. The rope net swings in and out. The ship and the Higgins boat struggle to meet 20, 30 feet down. I'm going to hit the water and be crushed between the ship and the Higgins boat. We managed somehow to embark into the Higgins. The boat was full. The motor started, the boat shuddered, and away we went, up and down the waves. No land in sight. Go toward the noise and flashes of fire. We were under the swishing sound of our big guns, 12 and 14-inch shells, trumpeting awesomely, cutting the air above us, almost lifting us out of the water. My heart was pounding out of my shirt as though my life were being sucked out. It was horrifying. As we approached the beach, the Germans continued spraying our boat with machine gun fire. Our boat went as close as it dared, and the ramp went down. I was the third one out, water up to my chest, holding my M1 high, pushing the water with my legs, trying to keep my balance. I was numb with fear of what I was about to encounter. It was early dawn, foggy, smoke-covered beach, flashes of light, rumbling explosions, German artillery, mortar shells bursting around us, bullets whizzing by. At the water's edge, I tripped over several dead GIs. My hair stood on end. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me through the smoke and gauntlet of enemy fire, running erratically, avoiding GIs that had fallen. I ran toward a bluff that had a slight overhang where others were huddled. We were wet, scared, and trapped, all in a state of shock. Nothing was said. We made room for each other, mirroring our fear, unable to encourage each other. Pausing for a moment to contemplate, I realized the improbability of my ever going home again. The invasion continued. Barbed wire and landmines were everywhere. The water was filled with boats, pressure to unload their men and equipment. To my right, through a haze of smoke and fog, bodies were everywhere. Steel obstacles were scattered throughout the beach. The indiscriminate slaughter continued. As our men scrambled frantically for safety, a lieutenant made his way, running toward us, looking as though he'd just come out of a storm into our little sanctuary of protection. Gasping for air, he said, "Men, this is Omaha Beach. You're on the second wave." Catching his breath, he continued, "For what you have just been through, you men deserve a Purple Heart. Now we are ready to do what we are trained for." Our group, the first and second wave of the First Army, was ready to move up. "Watch out for the landmines," someone exclaimed. We went through a small opening that had been in the barbed wire. The path had been marked by the men that had stepped on the landmines. When we reached the top, I felt we had broken loose from a trap, yet still quite apprehensive about the landmines. Not looking back, I could see where the Germans had entrenched themselves and were now dead. The shooting continued as we scampered to places of protection, roadside ditches. The Germans were beginning to surrender as they saw us inching up to them, crying out, "Kamerad, Kamerad." A white piece of cloth would go up and they would scamper out with their hands up, sometimes crying. The Germans were on the run. leaving their dead and wounded behind. They left their snipers behind to slow us down. But we continued advancing. We could still hear the rumbling sounds of those big shells being fired from our ships deeper into enemy lines, an enormous extended hand of protection for us, a welcome sound. Our trucks, tanks, artillery pieces, and supplies were catching up to us. Every time we would liberate a town, the people would run out of their homes to greet us. Church bells would ring for hours, day or night. The old men and women offered us wine and bread. Orders, we could not stop. I yield back.
Thank my friend from Texas and recognize Representative Guest from Mississippi. I yield.
This week we remember the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, known as Operation Overlord. The D-Day invasion began on the early morning hours of June 6, 1944 on the southern beaches of France, landing at beaches named Utah, Gold, Sword, Juneau, and Omaha. Over 4,400 Allied soldiers lost their lives that day. The invasion of France allowed Allied troops to establish a beachhead in Western Europe and would go on to change the course of the Second Great War. Many of the courageous men who fought that day have since passed away, but we still have their recorded oral testimonies and letters to loved ones about the role that they played. Today I want to read a brief segment of a fellow Mississippian that landed at Normandy shortly after the initial invasion. Bilbro Rogers, born in Louisville, Mississippi, said this about his service. I was unloading the ships there in France, unloading guns, trucks, and ammunition, food, medical supplies, and all that in France after I got there. But we were still involved in battle because they were shooting at us, trying to kill us. I didn't pull my shoes off in 3 weeks because they didn't allow you to pull them off, because you may have to run at any time. We had to sleep in our shoes. And when we were in France, we slept in foxholes. You dig a hole in the ground about 4 feet and you get down there, you and your partner. You've got one partner, 2 people in one hole. Foxholes with dirt falling in your face and all that. Bilbro Rogers was one of the countless heroes that placed themselves in harm's way to help America and her allies defeat Nazi Germany and to protect the liberties and freedoms we still enjoy today. May we always remember the sacrifices of our brave warriors. I yield back.
I thank my friend from Mississippi, and I yield to my good friend from Utah, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, my good friend from Alabama, for this opportunity to reflect on the last hours of many of our courage and sacrifice of the greatest generation, those who served and died for the land that they loved. Shortly before D-Day, 2nd Lieutenant Jack Lundberg from Val Verde, Utah, wrote a letter to his parents. Now I'm actually here. I see that the chances of my returning to all of you are quite slim. Therefore, I want to write this letter now while I'm still able to. I want you to know how much I love each of you. You mean everything to me. It is the realization of your love that gives me the courage to continue. I have requested that this letter be forwarded only in the event that I do not return. You have had many times more than your share of illnesses and deaths in the family, and still you continue to exemplify what true parents should. I am sorry to add to your grief, but at all times realize that my thoughts are of you constantly, and I feel that in some small way I'm helping to bring this wasteful war to a conclusion. We of the United States have something to fight for. Never more fully have I realized that. There is no other country that is comparable to wealth, advancement, or standard of living. The USA is worth the sacrifice. Remember always that I love each of you most fervently, and I'm proud of you. Consider Mary, my wife, as having taken my place in the family circle and watch over each of you. Love to my family, Jack. 2.5 weeks later, after D-Day, Lundberg was the lead navigator on a B-17 flying over Albertville, France. That it was hit there by a German anti-craft fire, burst into flames and crashed. Lundberg was killed. Second Lieutenant Jack Lundberg represents then and now the very best of Utah and our great nation. It is a spirit of willing sacrifice, love of family and country that will continue to guide our minds, souls, and hearts to be the light of freedom to those around the world. I, too, was raised by a veteran of World War II. I was blessed to see those who not only ran toward fear, but came back to their homeland and built the greatest generation, the greatest middle class, who broke the barriers that we were then fighting to break, and went on to teach their generation to be patriotic and love our nation. We will never forget America's greatest generation and their extraordinary sacrifices for freedom. Thank you, and may God bless you in his eternal blessings. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank my friend from Utah, and I recognize my friend from Texas, Mr. Sell.
Thank you to my friend and colleague from Alabama for hosting this. Fellow Texan William Nation was an Army captain in the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment on 22 June 1944, somewhere in France. Dear folks, just a note to let you know that everything is still okay. We got our mail a few days ago, and I was glad to hear from you again. We've been plenty busy here, and last night I pulled off my boots for the first time since D-Day. I guess you know by now what D-Day is. We have had some real experiences, some that I hope never to go through again. But we've made it out all right so far. I guess you know more about what we did than I by reading the papers. We had 2 news writers drop with us. One broke his leg, but the other is riding all along. This will have to be cut short for now, but I'll try to write more this afternoon. I'll try to let you know from day to day how things are. But if you don't get a letter from me, don't be worried. We all feel rather immortal after that first night, and most of us are living on borrowed time anyway. Love, Bill. Just a quick story. When I parachuted into D-Day celebrations in 1993, went up to the superintendent of the cemetery that stands there above Omaha Beach. He motioned to a D-Day veteran saying goodbye. He said that man was a combat engineer on Omaha Beach. He led the first wave ashore. He was the only man of his unit that made it alive onto the shore. And he comes back to visit his buddies every year. This year, when I parachute into D-Day, Friday, I will be carrying a portrait of Glenn Stevens, G Company, 3rd Battalion, 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who parachuted into D-Day. He was a constituent all those years ago in CD3 in Texas. I'll also be carrying a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart that belonged to Staff Sergeant Starlin Lee Klink, who was a veteran of D-Day. It's my little way of honoring the men who risked everything on June 6th, 1944. May we never forget, and I yield back.
I want to thank my friend from Texas and certainly all my colleagues. That's quite an amazing story to get it firsthand in letters. And I'd like to close with an excerpt from a newspaper describing the reaction to D-Day at home in Montgomery, Alabama. Dear gang, you're probably wondering what it was like at home on D-Day. Well, like everything else in the world, we guess, Montgomeryans were steeped in a reserved excitement, wanting to shout out, "We're pulling for you, gang," but realizing there was an ocean in between. Everyone was literally burning with pride as the news flashed throughout the day. Radios were never turned off during that first 24 hours, and there was one topic of conversation, and only one. All stores closed at 5 p.m., and at that same hour, 2 buglers stationed throughout the city went into action. All traffic stopped, and a period of silent prayer was observed. At 8 p.m., prayer services were held in every Montgomery church. Almost without exception, every pew was filled. WSFA canceled all commercial programs and announcements, and for more than 30 hours, only broadcast invasion news or specially prepared programs in honor of the courageous men who sailed and flew across the channel. When prayers were being said over the air, it was not uncommon to see a sidewalk group, including some perhaps who were praying for the first time, to lift their hats and stand reverently until the prayer was done. At 9 p.m., the whole town, along with the remainder of the nation, listened with bowed heads as President Roosevelt offered his Invasion Day prayer. As the full moon, riding in a partially clouded sky, shone down in later hours, Montgomeryans finally closed their eyes, proud, appreciative, and confident of the eventual outcome. I want to thank all my colleagues again for who all participated, and to Congressman Palmer and his staff for his help in coordinating this special order. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January